Maybe that would be something if Trump organised that to be up and running again, he could then presumably charge Ukraine for that power. I mean, maybe that's the way he's thinking. But, it just seems another, dare I say it, harebrained idea from the most powerful man in the world.
Hamish de Bretton-Gordon, welcome back. 2 days in a row. I think that's some sort of record. But you are the perfect guest for this. So let me just start by asking what I think is probably quite a simple one. And that is what the running of Ukraine's nuclear power would actually require, whoever does it, hopefully in peacetime.
Well, Ukraine is one of the foremost nuclear power countries in the world. Everybody knows about Chernobyl back in the 80s, which caught fire and spread contamination over the world. But apart from that, Ukraine has always invested very heavily in nuclear power. Before the war started, over 57% of Ukraine's power output came from nuclear. And that was 4 major reactors, more modern than the Chernobyl one. And the largest reactor, or the largest power station in Europe, in Zaporizhzhia, with 6 reactors, which has been overtaken by the Russians for the whole part of the war, and has not generated electricity. Now, this is, although nuclear power generation is pretty straightforward, it does require a very, very high level of safety and assurance, because the nuclear word means many, many things to people. Most of it is unfounded, but with a terrible accident like Chernobyl, safety is absolutely paramount here. Now, the Ukrainians are really the masters of this. They are the best, I would have thought, at running these power stations, but it does take a lot of expertise. It's crucial that you always have power to a nuclear power station. That might sound a strange thing, because one of the key safety elements is making sure that you can keep the core reactor at a steady temperature. And also, at most nuclear power stations, there will be stores of spent nuclear fuel. And it's crucial that that is kept at a certain temperature, usually with water. And some of the issues we've seen across Ukraine is where power's been cut. And without the water to control the temperature of particularly spent fuel, it can go critical and can explode. And many people remember the Fukushima accident in Japan, where basically the nuclear fuel went critical, as we called it, exploded, and that caused a problem. So it's complex, but the Ukrainians are expert at this. But it's essential. One of the terrifying things about the Ukraine war and war in general is you don't want to be fighting around nuclear power stations. Although an accident, deliberate or by pure chance, can create a real issue with nuclear power stations, it won't create a nuclear explosion as in a nuclear bomb. But we know that the radiation, uranium and plutonium, is very dangerous and can travel great distances. So safety is critical, and it should be done by people who know what they're doing.
Hamish, what's in this then for Donald Trump and in his mind for the US? I mean, forgive the cynicism, but he doesn't often offer to do something without kind of getting something back. Is this about security for him, really, truly, for Ukraine, or could they somehow, I don't know, siphon off Ukraine's nuclear energy for his own benefit?
It's very difficult not being cynical about this latest move from Trump, particularly after his failed attempts for the ceasefire earlier on in the week. Now, Ukraine, President Zelensky asked for more air defense to protect these nuclear power stations. And that really would be the most sensible thing for the Americans to do. Patriot missiles is what they're really after. But to control it himself, I assume he's suggesting by putting American people at these plants that the Russians wouldn't attack them. And I think that is an assumption being made by a businessman and not a military person. That is not an assumption I would make. We've already seen too many missiles and drones flying through the wires, if you like, of nuclear power stations, not least Zaporizhzhia. So to assume that Putin won't do it, Putin is the master of conflating issues and what we call false flag events. So it would be very easy for Putin to organize an attack on a nuclear power station run by Americans and then, of course, blame somebody else, because why on earth would Putin attack Americans? So I think there are a number of assumptions that Putin's making, which is being clouded by his business mind rather than sound, practical security and military issues. As far as the power itself, I mean, it would be great for Ukraine to get the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power station running again, because that generates serious power. I believe about 10 to 15% of Ukraine's requirements. But at the moment, it's doing absolutely nothing because the Russian military are holding it. Maybe that would be something if Trump organised that to be up and running again, he could then presumably charge Ukraine for that power. I mean, maybe that's the way he's thinking. But, it just seems another, dare I say it, harebrained idea from the most powerful man in the world. But, rather than, if he really wants to make sure that Putin doesn't attack Ukraine, he probably needs to put Russian military on the ground, not American military on the ground, not American civilians.
I mean, that being said, it's quite clear you don't necessarily think that this will deliver the security that Trump is suggesting then for Ukraine. But surely, in the scenario that you've just mentioned there, Russia attacks one of these nuclear plants that is being run by Americans. Even Trump would go, well, come on, we've got to defend these people, and it's quite clear that Russia has done this. Surely there has to be that element of security there. Surely, even under Trump.
You would have thought so. I mean, there are Americans in Ukraine anyway doing various activities. I won't name a multinational company that I advise. I won't name which it is. It undoubtedly has American and British people working on it. But I think this is common knowledge. So having Americans in Ukraine has not stopped him attacking. There is a US embassy in Kyiv. It hasn't stopped Putin attacking Kyiv, even last night. So I think that's why I say it's a failed assumption. Of course, by absolutely telegraphing it to Putin, you would have thought that Trump would have to react. It strikes me there are much better ways than trying to produce a ceasefire than putting Americans in nuclear reactors. I just look back to what we did to stop Iranian missiles being fired at Israel. We knocked over 200, I think 340 of them down, from outside airspace of Iran and Israel. Why on earth doesn't the American president, and I'm sure the British Prime Minister would agree to it, do something like that? Have American and British jets sitting outside Ukraine, but able to take out missiles fired into Ukraine. So, yeah, it just seems a bit harebrained to me, and I can't. Maybe the brilliant man has come up with an idea that us mere military experts can't see because we're just soldiers, we're not politicians or businessmen. But it strikes me as a bit of a non-starter.
The one other thing I thought about this, just as a possibility, it would have been, do you think that there's a chance that if they take over the running of, multiple, maybe even all of Ukraine's nuclear plants, are any apart from Zaporizhzhia in areas that, would be, pointless, I guess, for Russia to attack? I guess what I'm saying is I'm just thinking if they're kind of in the middle of nowhere, Trump could go, well, we're going to control them and we'll promise you if we come under attack, we'll defend you. But actually, if they're in the middle of nowhere and Russia have no interest in those areas, then actually they'd go nowhere near them, and America could be there pretending to offer security guarantees that were never going to come anyway.
Well, I think there are possibly a few things associated with that is predicated on the fact that that Putin will go no further than he is at the moment, and the contact line that they're talking about will be frozen, and that will be it. I think those of us who've looked at this for some time and far more academic and far cleverer people than me believe that is not the case. That actually Putin, I mean, he very much believes he's winning at the moment, so why on earth would he stop? he very much believes Ukraine should be completely subjugated and brought back into Russia, where he thinks it belongs. And actually, further to that, he believes that all the old Soviet Union countries should be brought back into a greater Russian Federation. That is his ultimate aim. That's what he has been telling us for the last few years, and we have sort of stuck our heads in the sand. So, if Putin is happy to stop where he is, then what you're saying is certainly viable. Those, apart from Zaporizhzhia, the other three nuclear power stations are in the sort of northeast of Russia and northeast of Ukraine and northwest of Ukraine. So you could see that they're far from the contact line and wouldn't be an issue. But I think the other final thing, the second point here, is that this is all about infrastructure. And Trump seems to think that Putin agreed not to attack infrastructure. However, Putin has tried to switch the lights off and the power off and the heat off in Ukraine for the last 3 winters, and he's failed. Conversely, Ukraine has really attacked hard the Russian hydrocarbon industry, which is the backbone of Putin's economy, which is fueling his ability to stay in this fight. So that's what he is concerned about. If he can do a quid pro quo where Ukraine can't attack Russian oil refineries in return for allowing American to run Ukrainian nuclear power stations, then you can see that would be viable. But again, it's handing all the advantage and all the cards to Putin, who is the aggressor in this. We should not appease him in any way.
I think maybe you've sort of touched on this, but if I can just get you to talk in a little bit more detail on it. There's this slight confusion, isn't there? Zelensky suggested after this conversation with Trump that this was only about Zaporizhzhia. Trump talked about, power plants as in plural. But in isolation, it does appear to me that Ukraine would presumably, if it was just Zaporizhzhia, far prefer Trump-led America even running this than Russia. But maybe you've just touched on why Russia might agree to that, because initially I was thinking, if they're controlling it, why would they ever agree to give it up?
Entirely. I mean, this is a real jewel in their crown, Zaporizhzhia. You can imagine that if the contact line is frozen where it is, and Putin gets his way and has those 4 oblasts and Crimea integrated back into Russia, he's got a ready-made power plant that's going to provide them power without him having to spend a dime, a ruble on it. So I cannot understand why, if I put myself in Putin's shoes, it's the last thing I'd be doing, giving this up. And if that is just what Trump is looking at, because you can see it's a fairly modern nuclear power station, it generates a massive amount of power, and presumably he can make a lot of money out of it. So this is why I think this is a bit harebrained. If one looks in the cold light today with a rational head on, I can't see why Putin would agree to it. And really, it doesn't help the Ukrainians in any way at all.
Is it easy to restart a currently non-operational power plant such as Zaporizhzhia? I just wonder whether if Trump took control of it and then realised it was a big job, he might give it up anyway.
Well, I wouldn't want President Trump anywhere near a nuclear power station looking at the on-off switch. I'm being slightly glib here. I think for the experts who run it and the people are there, it's not an inconsiderable job, but they will know what to do. It's not quite an on-off switch. One has to make sure that everything is run up again, and all the checks and balances are done, all the seals that perhaps have been dormant for a few years are good. There'll be a lot of safety checks to get it up and running again. But like anything, I wouldn't want to fly an aeroplane because I haven't a clue how to do it. But if I was a pilot for the last 30 years and had a year off, it would be a relatively straightforward experience to get back in and fly it again. So, it's if you know what you're doing, I suppose with most things, it'd be relatively straightforward. If you don't know what you're doing, it could be really dangerous.
And just one final one, Hamish. If this was, all of Ukraine's plants, or even just multiple, a couple more, say, that are currently under Ukrainian control, but that they would be giving over to America, Are they agreeing to this purely because they are being backed into a corner again by Trump? I just wonder why this isn't one of the total red lines for Zelensky.
Well, I suppose when you are fighting for your life and your very existence, and Zelensky has said, they absolutely want peace. To give Trump a couple of nuclear power stations, that if that gives you peace and security and stability, then so be it. The alternative is if Trump allows Putin to crack on and take Ukraine. So maybe it is a lesser of some of the other evils, but I cannot see. It strikes me that Trump could do an awful lot else. He could confirm that the might of the US military is behind Ukraine. And if he says that, Putin is no fool. And he would know that if he tried to come up against the US military, he would lose.